Some people say they have found the cure for the opioid crisis in medical cannabis, using marijuana as an alternative treatment instead of potentially deadly prescription painkillers. It's actually the most common use for medical cannabis in the state. The only problem is if you're a pain patient, chances are very slim that you're going to be able to find a doctor in this area willing to certify you. In the final installment of our special report, we are asking the big hospitals why.
Like, this was my last hope. There wasn't any. I didn't want to live.
In Minnesota, even though she and thousands of other patients legally qualify for cannabis as an intractable pain patient, the Minnesota Department of Health will not release the names of doctors willing to certify them. They say the program is meant for doctors to certify their current patients who have already exhausted all other methods. Fox 21 is the first to get data from the state that shows just how big of a flaw there is in the Minnesota medical cannabis system. A glaring disparity in the number of doctors who will help legally qualified patients get access to cannabis in northern Minnesota. With just over 1,100 practitioners currently enrolled in the state's program to certify patients, only 24 are in St. Louis County. In Lake, Cook, and Aiken County, there are 0 providers. While more than 60% of cannabis-friendly doctors are in the Minneapolis and St. Paul region, even some smaller Minnesota cities have significantly more doctors certifying patients than in Duluth. The Rochester area has 172, and there are 37 providers near St. Cloud. St. Louis County's 2 major hospital systems, Essentia Health St. Mary's and St. Luke's, have never certified a patient suffering from chronic pain for medical cannabis unless they also have a terminal illness.
Our policy still is that we're not using that at this point for chronic pain treatment alone.
I mean, if you're basing it on someone that could walk out of the hospital, die because of an opioid overdose, or they could try medical marijuana and their life be changed, how do you kind of, I mean, what's pumping the brakes on that?
What's pumping the brakes on it is that there's no reason to think that that would, at this point, function as an appropriate substitute.
But a recent study by the Minnesota Department of Health does point in that direction. The state studied more than 2,000 Minnesota cannabis patients with intractable pain and found in the first year 60% reported significant pain reduction and 60% were able to reduce or eliminate opioid use. Only 10% reported no significant benefits from cannabis.
Well, I wish we had a perfect drug to treat pain that wasn't addictive, that had no side effects, but that just doesn't exist.
But some people would say that that could be medical marijuana.
And in some of the cases, some of the trials that they've done on just looking at pain control, medical marijuana has been shown to be effective for some patients with some conditions more than others.
Well, tonight, the Duluth Transit Authority could be facing a lawsuit over a bus ride gone very wrong for a 71-year-old man. He ended up in the ICU with bleeding on the brain after being nearly beaten to death by another passenger as the bus driver drove off.
The DTA has a policy that if something happens on the bus where a behavioral problem escalates to a level where personal safety is a concern and requires response from law enforcement, the driver is supposed to hit a covert alarm that calls 911. But in the case of this assault, police couldn't give us a record of any 911 call. Instead, an officer happened to drive up on the aftermath of the fight on West Michigan Street.
The city still refuses to release surveillance video from the bus or tell us if the driver faced any disciplinary action. To do this, they're referencing a state data release law that says information can be kept confidential if there's a pending civil lawsuit. But no lawsuits have been filed in civil court. They refuse to name the party that could be suing them. So tonight we asked leaders about bus safety after several viewers sent us messages about their concerns on the bus.
At a press conference last week about new electric DTA buses, we asked Duluth's Mayor Emily Larson for a response to some of the public's comments about safety that I had sent her through email earlier in the week.
How do you respond to people that say they don't feel safe on the bus?
I ask them more about what that means and try to direct their questions to someone who can help answer them.
Is there any way to make sure that if a driver sees something and doesn't call 911, there's actually a response to that?
Well, that would be a great question for both the DTA, and then you can refer that right back to our attorneys who could give an answer to the question that you have.
Okay, but they haven't given me an answer. So what's your response to that?
Well, my response is I'm going to refer it back to our attorneys.
What about people that want to know more about what's actually happening on the bus and are wondering why they don't hear it from the DTA if there is an assault?
On the question that you've asked, on advice of legal counsel as a pending legal matter, we have been advised to no comment because it's a potential pending litigation.
Okay. Do you know who is the person that might be suing the DTA?
I have no further comment on that.
Back in 2015, a BCA audit showed the city had the highest number of sexual assault kits sitting on evidence shelves that were never sent to the crime lab for DNA testing.
Now, the old kits, some dating back to 1993, have now been tested thanks to a federal grant. And tonight we're taking a closer look at what's happening now and the reasons that hundreds of kits were never submitted in the first place.
The DNA in the 15-year-old sexual assault kit sat on police shelves from 2010 to 2016.
You have a first name, a general location, but everything else of the investigation stops. Was there any desire to send the kit that was completed, the DNA kit that the victim submitted in for testing?
Yeah, so our organization, as a rule, when we didn't have a named suspect, we did not submit kits in that time frame to the BCA for testing.
An explanation that Jude Foster of the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault says doesn't make much sense.
I don't think that that's common.
The grant meant all Duluth kits got sent in for testing, including the 15-year-old victim's kit from 2010, which found a hit. The DNA of 43-year-old Curtis Guy Marcula, who would have been 36 when he sexually assaulted the 15-year-old. His DNA was already in the system even before the reported assault happened, and he was already behind bars on other charges. In fact, he was a familiar face to Duluth police. They featured him as their property crimes wanted person of the week back in 2014 for probation violations. All of that attention gave them a tip to his whereabouts then, and he's been in prison since. When confronted with this sexual assault case, he pled guilty to fourth-degree criminal sexual conduct and was sentenced to additional time in prison.
The sexual assault was reported in 2010. If you take a look at his record, he's got a burglary conviction, a sale of controlled substance charge, a DWI conviction, and then a domestic assault conviction. Those all happened after the time the crime was reported.
Right.
So do you feel maybe some of this didn't need to happen?
Yeah, without question.
The prison release of a repeat violent sex offender in Spooner, Wisconsin is prompting a lot of questions about the judicial system tonight.
That's right. No one in town will rent him a house or apartment, so the Justice Department is allowing him to live homeless in a tent in the woods just feet away from a park, school, and daycare.
55-year-old William Baugh first got in trouble with the law back in 1984. According to a sex offender release bulletin, that's when he forced a minor into prostitution and burned her with an iron when she initially refused. In 2006, he was on work release while serving time for other crimes, and before he arrived at his job site, he broke into an elderly woman's home while she was sleeping, raped, and injured her. In 2010, he pleaded guilty to and was convicted of that assault and battery. Since then, he's been in and out of prison on parole violations. It was back on September 4th when the DOC released him to live homeless in Spooner and told him to keep his GPS bracelet charged in the parole office, which is located right next to a school, park, and daycare.
I run a daycare with 65 kids here just about every day. I went on high alert.
Joanna Shelton, owner of Creative Kids Learning Center, says the daycare is on lockdown, with Baugh living essentially in their backyard.
Not saying that he would do anything, but we're just being super proactive here. We have a lot of responsibility to keep the kids safe here.
Out of the 6 of us, 5 of us have had some kind of cancer, and that was pretty shocking when I started thinking about it.
It might seem odd that he considers himself lucky. He had his own skin cancer diagnosis just a few years ago.
Pretty insignificant compared to some of my friends died from their cancers, and so I feel fortunate that way.
That's reality for this generation of firefighters. For many, canoe trips after retirement don't exist.
And when Wally died, he was kind of our leader, and then we just kind of didn't go on trips anymore after that.
A scene like this starts as a home just like any other. So we invited Duluth Fire Captain Andy Goltz to explain to us what exactly happens to everything inside when it burns. Even what you might be sitting on right now, a sofa with flame retardants, actually isn't a firefighter's friend when it ignites.
They think, oh, this is safe. This will actually be helpful in a fire, but it's not the case.
It kind of depends, but in this situation, it's probably not a good thing. Actually, the state of Minnesota in 2015 banned 4 of the chemicals that are used for these flame retardants.
Almost all modern homes have one thing in common.
It's the entire house.
It's everything. Yeah, plastic is so prevalent in our building materials and what we have in our homes. It's all over the place.
The cost to get other smaller departments up to speed would be huge.
A second set of turnout gear is $1,500. You know, times 20,000 firefighters in the state of Minnesota, that's $3 million, you know, if it was going to be done statewide. A new piece of apparatus is $300,000 to $500,000, maybe $1 million for a large tower truck. The gear extractor, well, installed, they're about $12,000 a piece, and there's 780 fire departments in the state of Minnesota.